One might argue that if the Alpha King had looked up even once, Alette would never have signed. But then again, if he had been a sort of man who looked up, there would have been nothing to sign in the first place. So really, when one thought it through properly, the whole business was his doing, every part of it. Alette had been Queen of Arundel for 3 years, and in all that time, she had never once raised her voice in the Hall of Accord. She did not raise it now. The hall had been built for treaties, not for endings. Black oak table, a ceiling too high for warmth, 200 seats along the walls for witnesses who were not meant to speak. Every seat was full. Word travels through a palace faster than the people it concerns, and half the court had come to watch a marriage be unmade. They sat very still and looked very solemn, and Alette could smell the appetite on all of them. She had dressed for it, which was the part Yara had argued with. Yara wanted gray, something plain and wounded, that would shame the court into looking at the floor. Alette wore the deep green from her own wedding feast, because if they had come to watch her be discarded, they could at least look at her properly while they did it. Her hands did not shake once. The Lord Steward stood at the head of the table with the document laid out before him. Beside him, in a chair he had not bothered to push back, sat Kyavan, King of Arundel, Alpha of the Northern Pax. Her husband for 3 years and 1 month, and a man who could hold a room without ever raising his chin. He was doing it now. His head was bent over the page, his hair fallen forward the way it always did when he read, his hand flat on the oak beside the inkwell. He did not look up when she came in. Alette had prepared for a great many things that morning. She had prepared for cruelty, which she could have answered. She had prepared for pity, which she could have borne. She had even prepared, in the small treacherous hours before dawn, for him to stand and say her name and tell the whole hall that this had been a mistake. She had not prepared for the top of his head. "If it please the crown," said the Lord Steward, "we may begin." Halvard had a voice made for reading terms aloud, warm, unhurried, entirely without weather in it. He had used it to tell her she was clever when she was 14, and weighing barley at a scale house in Dunmere. He used it now to take her life apart in the order the clerks had written it down. The dissolution of the union between the Crown of Arundel and the woman Alette of Dunmere, the return of the northern jointure, the surrender of the Queen's apartments within the fortnight, the surrender of the title, the household, the place at council. She listened to all of it, and none of it landed, because by then she had reached the table, and she had seen the page. There were 2 lines at the bottom for 2 names. The line on the right was empty, and waiting for hers. The line on the left already had his. The ink was dry. Not drying. Dry and gone flat, and feathered at the edges the way ink goes when it has had an hour to settle into good paper. He had not signed it in front of her. He had signed it somewhere else, alone, and then come down and sat in that chair, and waited for her to walk the length of the hall and find it. Something in her chest went very quiet. "The pen, madam," said a clerk, and held it out. She took it. "There is the matter of the seal," Halvard said. "The Queen's seal is crown property, and reverts upon dissolution. If it please, your Majesty, I will carry it to the treasury this afternoon." And Kyavan, without lifting his head, said, "Leave it with her." The hall made a sound. Not a word. Just 200 people adjusting in their seats at the same moment. Halvard's pause was so brief that she would not have caught it if she had not spent 9 years learning to read him. "Majesty, the seal authorizes the grain writs. It carries the Crown's authority over every storehouse between here and the pass. I know what it carries." "Then surely, leave it with her," the king said again, and that was the end of it. Alette stood with the pen in her hand and understood nothing at all. A man who wanted nothing further to do with a woman did not hand her the authority to move a kingdom's bread. It was not generous. It was wrong, the way a wrong note is wrong, and she put it away with the other things that did not add up, and bent and signed her name. It took no time at all. 3 years, 1 month, and the width of a nib. She set the pen down. "Then let it be witnessed," Halvard said, and let it be severed. They brought the cord. Every bonded pair in the north has one, braided at the wedding from a thread of each of them, and hers had hung in a box beside the bed for 3 years, and now it lay across a plate of grey slate while a bondwright with cold hands took up the knife. Alette had been told what a severing feels like. She had been told wrong. It did not hurt like a wound. It hurt like a room going dark while she was still standing in it. Everything that had been Kayavan, the low constant weather of him at the back of her skull, the thing she had never had to reach for, because it was always there, thinned and stretched and let go. She was alone inside her own head, for the first time since she was 20, her knees held. She was proud of that afterwards, and in the moment the cord parted, Kayavan looked up. She had spent the whole morning waiting for it, and now it came, and it was worse than the not looking. His face was open. Open the way a house is open when the door has been taken off its hinges. He was looking straight at her, and he said, "Alette, there is something you have, too." That was all. The rest went into the severing, the way a sound goes into deep water. His mouth kept moving. She saw the shape of 2 more words, perhaps 3. She heard nothing, because the thing that had carried his voice to her for 3 years had just been cut in half on a plate of slate. The bondwright laid down the knife. The witnesses rose. Halvard said something warm about the Crown's continuing care for her welfare. And Alette, who had come to that hall for an ending, walked out of it, carrying a sentence she had not heard the end of, and a seal she had no right to keep. The strange thing about losing a bond is how loud the world gets. She had not known it was doing that. For 3 years there had been a warmth under her ribs, so constant, she had stopped registering it, the way you stop hearing a river if you sleep beside it long enough. Now the river was gone, and every other sound came rushing into the space. Boots in the corridor, a door, 2 floors down, her own heart working away in the dark like something left running in an empty house. At dawn, she washed and dressed and went to the window, and by the time Yara arrived, with bread and a face like a thundercloud, Alette had already made a list. "You have made a list," Yara said. "I have made 3. Yara set the tray down harder than the tray deserved. "It has been one night. The grain, writs for the northern stores go out on the 8th day of every month," Alette said. "If nobody signs them, 4,000 people beyond the pass eat nothing in spring. That is not grief, Yara. That is arithmetic." Yara had been captain of the East Gate before she was Alette's friend, and she had the flat stare of a woman who has watched too many people be brave at the wrong moment. She was still wearing it when Osric came through the door without knocking, and ruined everything. "They are saying he signed it before you got there," Osric said. Alette said nothing. "Oh," said Yara, very quietly. "The hall is full of it." "That he had it done and dried, and then sat there and let you walk in." Osric's ears had gone red. He was the youngest of them, and had never learned to carry news gently. "Yara, they are laughing about it." "Get out," Yara said. He got out. Alette went back to the window below. The yard was filling with the ordinary morning. Grooms and carts, and a boy chasing a dog that did not want to be caught. And none of it knew that anything had happened. She found that steadying. "They are not laughing at you," Yara said behind her. "They are absolutely laughing at me." "Then let them." Yara came and stood at her shoulder. "You have a fortnight in these rooms. What will you do after?" It was the first honest question anybody had asked her in 2 days, and Alette discovered she had no answer to it at all. She had been Alette of Dunmere, and then she had been the woman who fixed the provisioning, and then she had been the queen. She had never once been simply herself with nothing attached, and the prospect of it opened up in front of her like a field with no fence on any side, and she was surprised to find that she was afraid of it. The knock came at midday. A page in the steward's livery, very young and very careful with his words. "The Lord Steward asks whether the Lady Alette would attend him at her convenience." Her convenience. Halvard had never in 9 years asked for anything at her convenience. His study sat above the treasury. A low, warm room that smelled of pipe smoke and old ledgers, and Alette had spent more hours in it than in any room she had slept in. Halvard was standing when she came in, which he did not do for anyone, and he crossed the floor and took both her hands in his. "I am sorry," he said. "I am so very sorry. My girl." And that, more than the hall, more than the dry ink, was what nearly took her legs out from under her because Halvard had found her. That was the plain fact of her life, and nothing afterwards had ever changed it. A steward on a tax circuit had stopped at a scale house in a border town and watched a 14-year-old girl argue a grain factor down from a false weight, using nothing but the man's own tally sheet. He had asked who she was, been told nobody's, and put her in his carriage that same afternoon. Everything she was, because a man had bothered to stop. "Sit down," Halvard said. "You look like something left out in weather." She sat. He poured, and did not offer her wine, which she noticed and was grateful for, and let the silence be comfortable for a while, which he had always been good at. "I want to ask you something," he said at last, "and I want you to hear all of it before you answer." "Ask." "What did he say to you?" At the end, when the cord went, Alette looked up. "I was watching his face," Halvard said. "Half the hall saw him speak, and you walked out of that room, looking like a woman who had been struck, and I have known you since you were a child, and you were not struck by the severing, you were struck by something," he said. "I did not hear it." Halvard's brows drew together. "You did not hear it. The bond was already cut." She heard how flat her own voice was. "Whatever it went into that. I saw his mouth move and I heard nothing at all." For a moment the Lord Steward did not move. Then he sat back in his chair, and something crossed his face too quickly for her to name it. And he said, "Well, perhaps that is a mercy, perhaps it is." "I have news," he said, "and I do not know whether it is good news. I have been sitting here since dawn, deciding how to give it to you. Then give it to me badly. I have had a bad 2 days. It will not stand out." That made him smile, briefly, and then the smile went. "The delegation from Andres arrives at the end of the week. Trade, the pass, the usual. Their king travels with them, which is unusual in itself." She waited. Halvard looked at her steadily. "He has asked for you," he said, "by name." Everybody in Orendel knew 3 things about Emmerich of Andres. He had held his throne 11 years without a war. He had refused 4 marriages, 2 of them advantageous enough that his own council wrote to him about it, and nobody could say what he looked like, because he sat for no portraits and put his face on no coins. The only description that ever came back from Andres was that he was tall and that he listened. He was tall, as it turned out. The listening part she did not believe until she watched him do it. The reception was held in the long gallery, because the Hall of Accord was not to be used again that season, and everybody was too polite to say why. Alette had not meant to go. Yara stood in her doorway, with folded arms, and pointed out that a woman who did not appear was a woman hiding, and that the court would spend the whole winter deciding what from. So she went, and wore gray, after all, not armor. Weather, something the eye slid off. It did not work. She had been queen in that gallery 11 days ago, and the room reorganized itself around her the moment she entered, the way water goes around a stone. By her second turn, she had counted 9 people who looked at her and then very deliberately elsewhere. Kayavan was at the far end in dark blue, the southern envoy talking earnestly at his elbow. He did not look over. She had told herself that morning that she had stopped waiting for him to, and had known even as she thought it that it was a lie, and here was the proof, delivered on schedule. Then the Andres party came in, and the room turned like a field of wheat. Emmerich was perhaps 40, dark-haired, plainly dressed by the standards of any court that owned a mirror. He greeted Kayvon first and properly, and then did something no visiting king had ever done in that gallery. He stopped talking and let the other man finish a sentence. Alette watched him work the room and understood, slowly, that he was not working it. He was reading it. He asked the master of the horse a question, then a second, that proved he had listened to the answer, which the master of the horse looked as though nobody had done in years. He reached her, 40 minutes later. She had been expecting it, and had built 3 exits. "Lady Alette," he said. "Your Majesty, I have wanted to meet you for 4 years," he said, "and be careful, because I intend to embarrass you." She had no idea what to do with that. Around them the conversation thinned the way it does when people are pretending not to listen. "The grain accord of the cold winter," Emmerich said, pitched not quite loud enough to be a speech, and far too loud to be private. "The one that opened the pass both ways, and kept 16 villages on my side alive." Andres was told, formally and in writing, that it was the work of the Crown of Arundel. "It was," Alette said. "It was not." Emmerich's mouth moved very slightly. "It was the work of one person who understood that a border is a shape you can argue with, who wrote the clause about the return carts, which is the only clause in that document that mattered, and whose hand I hold on 9 letters in my own archive. Nobody in this hall has ever said your name beside it. I came a long way to say it out loud." Alette became aware that a great many people had stopped pretending. She had been praised at that court before, the way a good horse is praised. Warmly in the third person, always to the man who owned it. She had never once stood in a room and had a stranger with a crown on his head describe her own work back to her in front of witnesses. Her throat closed. She was appalled at herself. "You are not to cry," Emmerich said pleasantly. "It will be reported that I was cruel to you, and my council will hear of it before supper." "I am not crying," said Alette, who was very nearly crying. "Good. Then I will say the rest. Andres keeps a warden of the northern stores, and the post is vacant. It is not decorative. It carries a seat at my table, authority over 4 granaries and every road between them, and the freedom to argue with me in public, which I am told is the part most people cannot manage." He looked at her. "I am not asking today. I am telling you the door exists, so that when you have finished being angry, you know where it is." Behind her, somebody dropped something. She did not turn round. She was aware, in the way an animal is aware, that across the length of that gallery, Kayvon had stopped talking. The evening went on. She was steered through 3 conversations. She did not remember afterwards, and at some point, an Andres captain mentioned the North Bridge, the one that went into the river last spring while the king was crossing it, and how fortunate it was that the timbers gave at the near end rather than the far. "Rot," said somebody, 50 years of it, and nobody had inspected the piers since the old king's day. Alette filed that away too, without knowing why. It was past midnight when she left. The corridor to the east lodging was cold and unlit, and she was halfway down before she realized somebody was standing at the turn. Kayvon did not step into her path. He stood with his back against the stone and waited to be seen, which was somehow worse. They had not spoken since the hall. "You should not walk these corridors without a light," he said. "I have walked them for 9 years." "That is not what I said." She could not read him. That was the thing she kept walking into, over and over, like a wall in a dark room. For 3 years she had never had to read him, because he had simply been there. Now there was nothing but a face. Was there something? "She said Halvard," said Kayvon. "Has he spoken to you about Andres?" Alette stopped. "He told me their king had asked for me by name. 4 days ago, before that delegation was within 100 miles of this city. Why?" And something moved behind Kayvon's face. It was not jealousy. She had braced for jealousy, and could have used it. It was quick, and it was cold, and it was gone almost before she caught it, and the only word she had for it afterwards was calculation. 4 days, he said, not quite to her. Kayvon pushed off the wall. "Get some sleep," he said. "Bar the door." And he walked away down the dark corridor, leaving her with an unlit lamp and the growing certainty that she had just answered a question she did not understand the shape of. There is a particular kind of morning that arrives when a woman has decided, without consulting herself, to behave as though nothing has happened. Alette had that morning. She was at the writ table by the 6th bell, with her sleeves pushed back, and when the clerk came in and stopped dead at the sight of her, she did not look up. "The stores at Kell," she said. "Say the number." "Madam," the clerk said, "you are not." "Say the number." He said the number. She wrote it down. She reached for the seal, breathed on it out of 9 years of habit, and pressed it into the wax. The small, clean weight of it, in her palm, was the only part of that week that had felt like standing on ground. Nobody stopped her. That was the strangest part. She had expected a steward at her elbow, by the 3rd writ, and instead the clerks brought her the books the way they always had, and the bread of 4,000 people went where it was supposed to go. She had almost begun to enjoy herself when Osric put his head round the door and said the trade session had been moved forward and that she was wanted in it. Wanted by whom? Osric's ears did the thing they did. "That is the part I was told not to say until you were already walking." The talks were in the small council room, which was a mercy, because it held 11 people and not 200. Emmerich sat at one side with 2 of his own. Halvard sat at the head with the toll schedule spread before him, and Caven was by the window with his back half turned, listening the way he listened, which was completely and without appearing to. Alette stopped in the doorway. Nobody had told her the king would be there. She had come in with ink on her fingers, and her hair pinned up anyhow, and the whole ruined morning caught up with her at once. "Sit," Halvard said kindly. "We are going in circles, and I am told you are good at corners." The dispute was the pass tolls. Andres wanted the winter rate held through the thaw. Arendal wanted the thaw rate from the first day. The road was passable, and the 2 positions had been restated at each other for 2 hours, in progressively colder voices, until the thing became a matter of pride, which is where negotiations go to die. Alette listened for 4 minutes. Then she said, "You are both arguing about the wrong date." The room turned. "The road is passable on the first dry week. But the return carts do not come back empty until 11 days after that, because the depot at Kell cannot turn them faster." She pulled the schedule toward her without asking anybody. "So, for 11 days every year, Andres pays the thaw rate on carts that are still carrying our grain. That is not a toll. That is a fine for our own slowness, and we have been charging it for 6 years. And I would be angry too." Silence. "That is not in any document," said one of the Andres men. "No," Alette agreed. "It is in the depot book at Kell, which nobody reads, because it is a depot book at Kell. Move the rate change to the 11th day after the road opens. Andres stops paying for our depot, we stop pretending we are faster than we are, and both of you can go and be proud about something else." Emmerich of Andres put down his pen and laughed out loud. It was not a diplomatic laugh. It was startled straight out of him, and it changed his whole face, and 2 of his own men looked at him as though they had not heard it before. "Write it as she said it," Emmerich told them, word for word. "I want the depot book named in the clause so that in 30 years somebody has to go and look at it." And across the room, by the window, Kyavan had turned around. She did not look at him. The effort of not looking at him took more out of her than the last 2 hours had. The rest was procedure. When it was done, Halvard rose and tapped the table for attention, and his voice was warm and pleased and entirely without weather in it. And Alette felt the first cold finger of warning before he had said 6 words. "Before we break," said the Lord Steward, "there is a happier matter, and I hope His Majesty of Andres will forgive me for saying it aloud, because I do not think it should be said quietly." Emmerich's expression did not change. Alette watched him understand what was coming, perhaps half a breath before she did. "The Lady Alette has been offered the wardenship of the northern stores of Andres." Halvard turned to her, beaming. "It is a great honor, and she has earned it twice over this morning alone. I should like the room to know it, and I should like her to know that nobody here would think the worse of her for taking it." There it was, beautifully done too. Loving, even. A kind old man giving his girl her wings in front of witnesses, and no possible way to refuse it now without making him a liar in public, and herself a woman clinging to a court that had cast her off. She saw the shape of the trap, and she could not see the hand that had built it, and that was the part that frightened her. "You do not have to answer that here," Emmerich said quietly. He said it to her, but he did not lower his voice, and every person at that table heard him hand her the door out. Alette looked down the length of the room. Kayavin was standing by the window with the winter light behind him, and his face absolutely empty. Not angry, not sorry, empty, the way a house is empty, and she waited 3 full seconds for something to cross it, and nothing did. "Then I will answer here," she said. "I accept. In Andres, when a king names somebody to his own table, he does not sign anything. He stands and takes their hand, palm laid to palm, and holds it while the room is told. It is an old gesture and a plain one, and it is not remotely romantic." And Alette knew all of that, and it did not matter at all, because Emmerich of Andres rose and crossed the floor and took her hand in front of the assembled council of Arundel, while her husband of 3 years and 1 month watched from 11 paces away. The room made no sound whatsoever. Alette felt the warmth of a stranger's palm against her own, and understood, distantly, that she had just done something that could not be taken back. And Kavin crossed the room. Everybody saw him do it. Halvard came half out of his chair. One of the Andres men put his hand near his belt, and thought better of it. The Alpha King of Arundel walked the length of that council room with his boots loud on the stone, and he did not look at Alette once, and stopped in front of Emmerich and said something too low for the table to catch. Alette was close enough. "Take her tonight," Kayvin said. "Do not wait for the escort. Do not tell anyone the hour." And he walked out. She got as far as the packing. She had gone back to the east lodging, pulled the traveling chest out from under the bed, folded 4 dresses into it, and stood looking at the 5th for a long time. Then she put the 5th back in the press, and sat down on the floor beside the chest, and did not move for a quarter of an hour. "Do not wait for the escort." She turned it over. She could make it mean contempt, and it fitted. A man so eager to be rid of a woman, he would not let her stay 1 more night under his roof. It fitted so well that she had spent the walk back hating him properly for the first time since the hall. But it did not fit the hour. "Do not tell anyone the hour." That was not the sentence of a man throwing something out. That was the sentence of a man who did not want a departure time written down anywhere. Alette sat on the floor and looked at the seal on the windowsill. Then she got up and went to the writ room. It was 2 hours before midnight, and the palace had gone quiet the way it did in winter. The writ room sat 3 doors down from Halvard's study, and she still had the key nobody had thought to take off her. She lit the lamp and opened the Northern book because she wanted, one last time, to see the columns straight. They were not straight. She found it on the 4th page. The Kell consignment, 30 carts, signed out on the 9th day of the month. She had written that line herself, 9 days ago. She remembered because the clerk had spilled sand across the page, and she had made him redo the blotting. The destination had been changed, not scraped, not crossed, rewritten, in the same brown ink, in the same hand. Alette held the lamp closer and felt the floor go strange under her. It was good. That was the thing that turned her stomach. Whoever had done it had the slant of her letters, the way she looped a lowercase g, the short bar she put on a T when writing quickly, and you do not learn that from one sample. You learn it from years of them, from a room full of them. Somebody has been reading my old writs, she thought. Somebody in the treasury has had my books out. She would think, much later, about how close she came in that moment. About how the whole answer was sitting there, in front of her, on the 4th page of a ledger, and how she looked directly at it and thought the word clerk. Then the door opened behind her. She had time to turn. She had no time to do anything else. There was a figure in the doorway, with a cloth across the lower half of the face, and it came in fast and went not for her, but for the book, and Alette did the stupidest thing she had ever done, which was to put both hands flat on the ledger and refuse to let go. There was a great deal of noise after that. The lamp went over, something hit the shelves, and brought half a year of pass returns down onto the floor. She got a handful of cloth and pulled, and felt an elbow catch her under the ribs hard enough to fold her, and then a line of cold along her forearm that she did not understand until much later. She kept the book. She was still holding it when the door came open again, and Yara filled it with a blade already out. By then the window stood open onto the treasury roof, and there was nobody in the room but the two of them, and a lamp burning on its side in a pool of oil. "You are bleeding," Yara said. "I am aware," said Alette, who had not been aware. They woke the king. Alette had been in that antechamber 100 times, most often at hours like this one. She stood in it now, with her sleeve cut away, and her arm bound, and the northern book held against her chest, like something rescued from a fire. Kayvon came out, fastening his shirt. He stopped when he saw her. Something went across his face. She could not read it, and she was so tired of not being able to read it. "Show me," he said. She showed him the arm first because she thought that was what he meant, and he made a sound that was not a word. Then she showed him the page, and he looked at it for a long time. "This is your hand," he said at last. "It is not. It is 9 years of somebody watching my hand." Alette's voice had gone hard and fast. 30 carts out of Kell, to a destination that does not exist, and done well enough that if the shortfall had been found in spring, the seal would have been mine, and the hand would have been mine, and I would have had nothing to say. Somebody is building a rope with my name on it. There will be others. Give me the treasury books and 4 days, and I will find every one. "No," he said. She stopped. Kayvon closed the ledger. "You will not open another book. No inquiry, no arrests, nothing said to the watch or the council." He held her eyes, and his own were perfectly steady. "This page burns tonight. So does the rest of the volume." She stared at him. "Somebody tried to take my hand off in your treasury. I know. That is evidence. I know what it is," he said. "And you are going to burn it," she said slowly, "and let it happen again, and I am supposed to walk out of this palace tomorrow and never ask why." "Yes," said the Alpha King of Arundel. That was all. No apology, no explanation, none of the things she had spent 3 years being handled with. Just yes, and a hand held out for the book, and the appalling steadiness of a man who was not surprised by any of this, and had not been for some time. Alette gave him the ledger. She did not do it because he was the king. She did it because as he took it, his thumb passed over the cut ends of her sleeve, where the cloth had been sliced away, and it was the only part of him that told the truth, and it was shaking. She did not leave. Emmerich took it better than she deserved. She found him at the stable yard before dawn, with his horse already saddled, and told him she needed a month. He said the northern stores of Andres had stood 400 years, and could manage another 4 weeks, and that he would send for her at the thaw. "You are not going to ask me why," she said. "You have a reason," said Emmerich. "If it is a good one, I will hear it later. And if it is a bad one, you will not want to have said it out loud in a stable yard." He gathered the reins. "May I say one thing that is none of my business? Everybody has been saying things that are none of their business for a fortnight. One more will not kill me." He was not empty, Emmerich said. "In the council room, when you accepted, Alette said nothing. I have spent 11 years watching men decide what to let their faces do," said the king of Andres. That was not an empty man. That was a man doing arithmetic very fast, and coming out at a number he could not afford. He put his foot in the stirrup. "I am not saying it is good news. I am saying you have been reading it wrong, and you are too good at reading things to enjoy that for long." Then he rode out, and Alette stood in the cold yard for some time. The month that followed was the strangest of her life. She stayed in the East, lodging with no title, no post, and no standing, and went on signing the northern writs because nobody had formally taken the seal off her and she had stopped waiting for them to. The court did not know what to do with her. Half had written her out of the story and the other half were laying odds, and Osric reported the odds daily until Yara threatened to have him posted to the pass, and she watched Kayvon. She knew which corridors carried sound, which windows overlooked the postern, which of the kitchen staff would tell her anything in exchange for being listened to. She used every part of it, and in 4 weeks she learned almost nothing. He rode out 3 times without an escort. He came back each time with mud to the knee and told the master of the horse he had been at the North Farms, and the North Farms had not seen him. He had a locked case brought up from the treasury on a Tuesday and sent back down on the Wednesday. He met the Southern envoy twice, both times after the 10th bell, both times in a room with no fire lit, which meant he did not intend to sit down, and he deflected her every time, effortlessly. She asked him, in a corridor, what had been in the case, and he asked whether she had eaten. She asked him at the war table why the North Bridge piers had never been surveyed, and he agreed that it was a disgrace and turned to the man on his left. She cornered him properly once, outside the chapel, and demanded to know who he was protecting, and he looked at her for a long moment and said, "You have ink on your face," and reached out and did not touch it, and walked away. She could have borne all of it, if not for the absence. That was the part nobody warned you about. A severed bond does not leave a wound, it leaves a shape. She would come round a corner and know he was in the room, before she saw him, then reach for the thing that used to tell her so, and find nothing, and have to stand still for a second while the nothing arrived. She reached for it perhaps 40 times a day. Some part of her behind all the sense had not been informed. She began to sleep badly. She told herself it was the arm. It happened at the storehouse, in the end, on a night when the pass was closed and the whole palace had gone to bed early. She was up on the ladder with the tally board. When he came in, he did not say anything. He took his coat off, put it over a barrel, picked up the second board, and started counting the far rack. And for a while there was no sound in that building but 2 people saying numbers to each other in the dark. It was the best hour she had had in 6 weeks, and she despised herself for it. 240 on the north rack, he said. 240 is wrong. It is what is there. It is what is there because somebody stacked the short crates behind the tall ones. Again, she came down the ladder. Count the shadow, not the wall. He went and looked. He came back and stood at the bottom of her ladder, with the board in his hand, and an expression she had not seen on him since the first year, when he had been 26 and newly crowned and had come to her rooms at midnight to ask what a jointure was, because he was too proud to ask the council. 212, he said. Yes, how long have you known that trick? Since Dunmere. Alette wiped her hands. My mother did it with eggs. Kayavon laughed. It was quiet, and it was real, and it went through her like a hand closing, and she stood at the bottom of a ladder in a cold building at midnight, and understood, with complete clarity, that she was not going to survive another month of this. So she said, "What do you want from me?" The laugh went out of him. Alette put the tallyboard down. I have been in this palace 4 weeks, with no reason to be here. You divorced me in front of 200 people without looking up. You would not take the seal back. You told the king of Andres to take me out of this city in the dark, and then you come and count crates with me at midnight, and laugh at my mother's eggs. Her voice had begun to go, and she let it. I am not asking you to want me. I am asking you to pick one. Kayvon set his board down very carefully on the barrel beside his coat. I cannot answer that, he said. You can. You are choosing not to. Yes, he said. I am. Why? And he looked at her, then, the way he had looked at her across the slate plate, on the day the cord went, with his whole face open, and the door off its hinges, and he said, Alette, there is something you have to. The bell went. Not the hour bell. The other one, the low one, from the east gate, that had not been rung in her lifetime, and that every soul in that palace had been taught as a child to know, and Kyavan was already moving, and the rest of the sentence went with him out into the dark. The east gate bell is rung for a death, in the house of the king. Alette had heard it described, and never heard it rung. It was lower than the hour bell and slower, and it did not stop. By the time she came out into the yard behind Kyavan, there were 40 people there in whatever they had been sleeping in, and a cart standing in the middle of them. There was a body in the cart under a piece of sacking. Kyavan went to it. He did not hurry. He put back the sacking himself, looked for a while, and covered the face again, with a care that Alette felt in her own hands. The dead man was perhaps 50, gray, at the temples, with ink on the first 2 fingers of his right hand. She knew that hand. His name was Rennick. He had kept the treasury books for 19 years, and he had been dismissed in the spring for drunkenness, and the whole floor had been sorry, because nobody had ever seen him drink. He had not been dismissed at all. She understood it standing in the yard in her nightgown, with her boots on the wrong feet, and it arrived so completely that she made a sound. Kyavan looked up at her across the cart. Whatever was on her face, he read all of it, and he shook his head very slightly, and it was not a denial, it was a request. So, she said nothing. He handled the yard beautifully. He always did. She found him 3 hours later at the top of the south stair, sitting in the dark like a boy waiting outside a room he had been sent out of. He did not look up. He said, "Do not tell me it was not my fault. I was not going to." Good. He turned something over in his hands, a small thing she could not see. That is the sentence people reach for, and I have started to hate it. Alette sat down on the step below him, which put her shoulder level with his knee and was the closest she had been to him since the ladder. His name was Rennick, she said. Kyavan's hands went still. He kept the northern returns for 19 years. He had a sister at Vel, and he could not spell the word consignment to save his life. She kept her eyes on the stone. He was yours. For 11 months, said Kyavan. And there have been others. 3, he said. The number went into her like a nail. Do you know what the difficult part is? He said it conversationally, which was worse. It is not the dying. Men have died for kings since there were kings. It is that every one of them came to me. Not one was ordered. They came and said, "Majesty, something is wrong in the treasury." And I said, "Yes, I know, help me," and I sent them back in. 4 people have offered to help me, and 4 are dead. And I have got very good at nodding at a cart, because there it was, laid out on a staircase in the dark, the whole shape of the last 6 weeks. Every deflection, every ink on your face, you have not been hiding it from me, she said slowly. You have been keeping me out of it. There is no difference to you. There is every difference to me. He looked at her then, and the exhaustion in his face was the most honest thing she had seen on it in 3 years. She did not decide to move. Her hand went out and closed over his, and she felt the cold of his fingers and the ridge of an old scar across the knuckle that she had once known better than her own, and underneath it, faint as a light, under a door, something moved. It was not a memory. She knew the difference at once, because for 3 years she had lived with that sensation, and for 6 weeks she had reached for it and found nothing. This was a thread, thin as a hair, and very far away, and it was warm, and it was frightened, and it was his. She let go of his hand as though the step had caught fire. Kyavan had gone absolutely still. "Alette," he said. "It is late," she said. "Alette, there is something you have to." "It is the cold," she said, and her voice came out wrong. "It is 3 in the morning, and a man is dead in the yard, and we are both saying things we would not say in daylight." For a moment he did not move. Then he said, "Of course." And his voice had gone somewhere careful and far off, and he stood up and put the small thing in his pocket, and she did not find out that night what it was. They both smelled it at the same time, not smoke. The sharp green stink of lamp oil, where lamp oil has no business being, coming up the south stair from the east, lodging, and underneath it, A light on the walls that was the wrong color for that hour. Her rooms were burning. She got there before he did. The whole end of the corridor was going, and the heat came off it like a hand pushed flat against her chest, and Yara was there with 4 of the watch and a chain of buckets that was never going to be enough. Kyavan went past her. She got a fistful of his shirt and put her whole weight backwards, and he came off his feet, and the 2 of them went down against the far wall together, and he was up instantly, and she was already in front of him, with both hands flat on his chest. "Get out of my way. There is nothing in there. The treasury copies are in there," he said, and something in his face came apart. "The whole northern set. If those burn, there is nothing left to prove anything with. And it has all been for nothing, every one of them. The copies are not in there." Alette shoved him backwards. "Neither is the seal." He stopped. She brought it out of her nightgown, on its cord, warm, from her own skin, the brass worn round the rim, from 9 years of being pressed into wax by the same hand. "I have not let it out of my sight since the writ room," she said. "And I moved the northern set into the bread store on the 2nd day, because the east lodging has 1 door and a wooden floor, and I am not an idiot." Kyavan of Arundel stood in a burning corridor and looked at her, and then he laughed. It was terrible, and it cracked in the middle, and it was the most relieved sound she had ever heard a person make. "Nobody hears about the copies," he said. "Not the watch, not the council, not the southern envoy, and above all, not the Lord Steward. I need your word. You have it." She gave it in a corridor, with the paint blistering off the walls, 6 paces away, and she meant it, entirely, and she broke it inside the hour, because he went fast, without a lamp, down the treasury stair, and she followed at 40 paces with her boots in her hand, and watched him go into Halvard's study and shut the door. She waited a long time, in the dark. When the door opened again, Alette had time to press herself flat behind the buttress, and no time at all to breathe. Halvard stood in his own doorway with a candle. He did not look surprised. He did not look afraid. He looked into the dark for a long moment, at nothing, at exactly the place where she was, and said very gently, "To no one. He has been in here again." And then, without turning his head, he said, "Come out, my girl. You are standing in the draft." There was no possibility of running, so she came out. Halvard held the door for her the way he had held it 1,000 times, and lit the second lamp, and poured, and Alette sat down in the chair she had sat in since she was 14, and understood that she had no idea whose room this was. "You followed him," Halvard said. "Yes. Good. Then I will not have to explain the difficult part." He turned the lamp up. On the desk between them, squared off and stacked the way he stacked everything, were the northern writs. The originals, the ones she had signed across 2 years, and beside them a second stack in a hand so like her own that her stomach turned over at 4 feet. "He has been at these for a month," said Halvard. "He comes in at night, and he has been through the cases twice. A man who suspects his steward asks. He does not sit in the dark practicing his steward's handwriting." "That is not his hand," Alette said. "It is mine." "Yes," said Halvard. "It is." And he looked at her with such perfect sorrow that she felt the floor of 9 years tilt under her. "I did not want to show you this," he said. "Think about what he has done in order. He put away his queen without cause. He left you the seal, which no crown lawyer in the north would call anything but negligence. He forbade an inquiry. He burned a ledger. He ordered you out of this city on a night that was never written down." Halvard's voice never rose. "And now your rooms have burned, and the copies with them, and there is nothing left in Arundel to prove where the northern grain went, except a seal in your hands and a woman with no husband between her and a rope." The lamp hissed. "He is building it on you, and he has been since the spring. And when the shortfall is found at the thaw, there will be a name on every page, and it will not be his." She sat very still. The awful thing was not that it was clever, it was that it was true. She checked the facts, one at a time, and not one was false, and they had been laid end to end by a man who knew exactly which way she leaned. "What do you want me to do?" she said. "Nothing tonight." Halbert's hand came across the desk and closed over hers, warm and dry and perfectly steady. "Only stop protecting him. Watch, and write down what you see, and bring it to me," he smiled. "You have always been the best pair of eyes in this building. It is why I stopped that carriage." And Alette, who was very tired, whose rooms were still burning, and who had felt something move at the end of a thread 3 hours earlier, said, "I will think about it." She reached the bottom of the stair before Cavan stepped out of the dark and took her wrist. "Do not," he said. "Go back in there." She pulled free. She was shaking and did not want him to see it, and he saw it. "Then talk to me," she said. "Once. Properly. No corridors, no jokes, no ink on my face. Because I have just been shown a version of the last 6 weeks in which you are the worst man I have ever met, and every fact in it is true, and I could not answer one. So, talk, or I will go back up those stairs." He took her to the bread store. It was the only building in the palace, with one door, no windows, and a lock he had the only other key to. He sat on a grain chest and looked at the floor. Then he said, "I signed it in another room." Alette did not move. "That is where I want to start, because it is the part you have carried, and the part I did worst. I signed it the night before, alone, in the map room, and had it carried down and laid on that table with my name already dry. And I sat in that chair for an hour before you came in, and I did not look up when you did, and I did not look up when they read the terms, and I did not look up when you took the pen. Why? Because if I had looked at you, I would not have finished it," he said, "and the whole of it depended on my finishing it." The store was very quiet. "There is a law," Kaivan said, 400 years old, and I had to have it read to me twice. "If a consort of this house is convicted of theft against the crown, the alpha is held to have known because of the bond, not suspected, held. He must abdicate, and the house passes to the strongest claim in council. In this council, that is the House of Rawl, and the Lord Steward has sat at their table since before I was born." Alette found the edge of a chest and sat down. "I found the first forged writ in the spring," he said. "Not the theft. The forgeries. Somebody was stealing grain and leaving your name next to it, tidily, where it would be found at the thaw. I could not prove who. I could not arrest a steward who holds the treasury and half the council on nothing. And I could not warn you." "Why not?" "Because you would have gone straight to him." She opened her mouth. "You would," Cavan said. "Not out of stupidity, out of 9 years. He is the only person who ever picked you up, and if I had come to you with a folded page and no proof, and said the man who found you means to hang you, you would have taken it to him inside the hour and asked him to explain. And he would have explained, and then he would have moved." Alette said nothing, because she had very nearly done exactly that upstairs 10 minutes ago. "So I took the only thing I could take. The law reaches a consort. It does not reach a woman who is not one, so I unmade it, publicly, at speed, in front of 200 witnesses, so that no lawyer in the North could call it a device. And I left you the seal, because it is the only object in this kingdom that can tell a true writ from a false one, and there was not another hand in Orendel I trusted with it, and Andres, he agreed. "A warden of Andres cannot be tried in an Orendel court, and Emeric is the only man alive I would hand you to, and I told him to take you that night because I had learned what the escort route was worth." Across the yard, men were still shouting about the fire. Alette found that she was crying, and had been for some time. "You decided all of it," she said. "Yes. You decided that I could not be told, and that I could not choose, and that I would be safer if I believed you had thrown me out." Her voice was wrecked. "You let me stand in that hall. You let me walk the whole length of it and find your name already dry. Do you know what I have thought about? Every night. For 6 weeks? Not the treason, not the law. That you did not look up. You are going to say, you did it to keep me alive. I did do it to keep you alive. That is not the same as loving somebody, she said, and watched it land. Kyavan sat on a grain chest with his hands hanging between his knees. No, he said. It is not. And then, quietly, because he had run out of everything else, Alette, there is something you have to. The door came off its latch. Osric fell through it, white to the lips with Yara behind him, and it came out in one piece. The Lord Steward has called the council. He has called the southern envoy. He is standing up in the great hall, and he has your name in his mouth. The great hall of Orendel had been built to hold 400 people, and held perhaps 90 that night, which was worse, because 90 people in a room for 400 can all see each other. Alette came in at the back, with the Lord Steward already speaking. He was very good, she had always known it, and had never once had it aimed at her. She stood at the door and listened to a kind, grieved, unhurried man explain to the council and to the southern envoy that the northern stores were 6,000 measures short, that the writs authorizing the loss carried the Queen's seal and the Queen's hand, that the treasury copies, which might have cleared the matter, had burned that same night in her own rooms, and that he had come by all of it, slowly and unwillingly, and would give a great deal not to be standing where he stood. He never said the word treason. He did not have to. He let 90 people say it to themselves, which is always more effective. And then, said Halvard, and here I must be careful, because I am an old man, and I am fond of her, and fondness is not evidence. There is the matter of the dissolution. The hall shifted. His Majesty put her aside 6 weeks ago without cause given, and left the crown seal in her keeping, which I told him at the time was irregular. He turned, mild as milk, toward the dais. I do not say he knew. I say only that the law does not ask whether an alpha knew. That was the moment Alette understood the whole of it. He had never needed her to be guilty. He had needed her to be accused while she was still close enough to the crown to bring it down. And Kyavan had cut that rope 6 weeks ago in front of 200 witnesses, and Halvard had been forced to come at it sideways ever since. Everything since the hall had been him trying to tie a knot in a cord that had already been severed, even the wardenship. He had pressed a foreign post on her in open council, and she had taken it for kindness, and it was only ever a road out of the kingdom, so that when the shortfall was found there would be a woman already gone. She walked up the middle of the room. She had not planned that. It simply seemed to her that the length of that hall had cost her a great deal once, already, and she was not going to be made to pay for it twice. The Lord Steward is right, she said. 90 heads turned. Every fact he has given you is true. The stores are short. The writs carry my seal and my hand. The copies burned. She reached the front and turned round to face the room and found she was not frightened, which surprised her. He has told you nothing false. He has simply not told you the last part. And the last part is a seal. She took it off over her head and held it up. There are 2 of these, she said. There has to be. Because a seal cannot be in a treasury vault in this city, and also on a writ signed at Kell on the same morning, and I have here, in my hand, 4 writs that say it was. She laid them on the council table. I have pressed this matrix into wax, perhaps 9,000 times. She turned it in the light. It has a fault. There is a nick out of the rim, at the lower left, from my 2nd year, when a clerk dropped the case and I did not report it, and every impression I have made since has carried it. There is a flaw in the wax like a bite out of the edge. She picked up the first writ. This is mine. There is the fault. She picked up the second. This is mine. There is the fault. She picked up the third and held it out to the southern envoy, and her voice did not shake at all. This one moved 30 carts out of Kell to a depot that does not exist, and the rim is perfect. It is a beautiful, clean, whole rim, made by a matrix cut from an impression by somebody who could copy a seal, and could copy a hand, and could not copy a 9-year-old accident, because he had no way of knowing it was there. Go and look at the wax. Go and look at all of it. Every true writ in this kingdom is broken in the same place, and every forgery is perfect. The hall made no sound. She turned round. You had my writs out of the cases, she said to Halvard. That is how the hand was learned. Not from one page, from years of them. I stood in the writ room, and I looked straight at it, and I thought the word clerk, because it did not once occur to me to think of you. Halvard did not move. You should have had a copy made of the seal in my first year, she said. You waited until the second, 11 days too late. Something went out of his face. She had seen him grieved and kind and gentle for 9 years, and she had never seen what was standing behind that desk now, and it lasted less than a second, and then he moved. He was not fast. He was 61 years old, and he went not for her, but for the writs on the table. And Alette had spent her whole life around men who thought that paper was the slow part, and she put her hand flat on the stack before he had covered half the distance and simply held it down. 2 of the watch had him by the arms. A breath later, the southern envoy was already picking up the 3rd writ and holding it to the candle. Emeric of Andres, who had come back in the night and whom nobody had told her about, stood at the side of the hall with his arms folded, and an expression like a man watching something he had paid a great deal of money to see. And Caven was at the back of the room by the door, not moving, not speaking, looking at her the way a man looks at weather. They took Halvard out through the north arch. He did not struggle, and he did not shout. At the door he stopped and looked back at her, and Alette braced for the knife of it, for whatever 9 years had left him to use. I did stop the carriage, he said. I know, said Alette. That is the part I will be carrying. Then they took him out, and it was over, and the hall filled with the enormous noise of 90 people who had been holding their breath. It took until nearly dawn to be finished with them. There were the writs to be sealed into the envoy's case. There was a statement to be given twice. There was the treasury to be closed, and the house of Rahl sent for, and a great deal of shouting that she was not required for and stayed for anyway. And then there was the yard, and the grey light, and Kievan. He had been waiting. He had been waiting some time by the look of him, and when she came out, he did not come forward. You were extraordinary, he said. Alette stood on the step with her arms wrapped round herself. I want to say all of it, Kievan said. I have had 6 weeks to arrange it, and I cannot get it in any order, so I am going to say it badly. I love you. I have loved you since the 2nd year, and I have been no use at all at saying so. Everything I did was to keep you out of a rope, and I would do the whole of it again tomorrow. And I would do it differently, because doing it right and doing it alone are not the same thing, and it has taken me a dead man in a cart and a burned corridor to learn the difference. He stopped. He was not charming. That was the thing that nearly undid her. There was no ease in him at all, no smile held ready in case it was needed, and he stood in the grey light of his own yard with his hands open, and nothing in them. I know, said Alette. His face changed. I know all of it, she said. I believe you. I have believed you since the bread store. That is not the difficulty. Then what is? And Alette found that she had known the answer for hours, and that it was very simple, and that saying it was going to be the hardest thing she had done that night. You made me small, she said. Kievan went absolutely still, not on purpose. That is why it is so bad. She kept her voice level with an effort that took everything she had left. You looked at the situation and you looked at me, and you decided that I could not be told, and that I could not choose, and that the safest place for me was in the dark, believing I had been thrown away like a chair. And you were right, Kievan. That is the unbearable part. I would have gone to him. I would have taken it straight to him, inside the hour. You knew me better than I knew myself, and you used it. And you were right, and you are still the man who decided for me. Alette, I have been decided for my whole life, her voice went at last. Halvard decided I was clever. You decided I was a queen. Then he decided I was a rope, and you decided I was a liability. And every single one of you was kind about it, and not one of you ever once asked. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist furiously. I have had 1 week in 9 years where somebody stood in a room and said out loud what I had built, and let me answer for myself, and it was a stranger from Andres, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. Jack Hyaven did not defend himself. He did not reach for her. He stood in the yard and took it, all of it, and when she was finished, he said, "What do you need?" "To be somewhere I am not a thing that happens to other people," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked, she thought, like a man reading a total at the bottom of a column and finding that it came out. "Then, take the wardenship," he said. She stared at him. "Take it. Go to Undris at the thaw." Kyaven's voice was perfectly steady, and his eyes were not. "It is the only thing anybody has offered you in your entire life that was not a use. And you have wanted it since the day he said it. And you will not go while I am standing here asking you not to. I was not going to ask your permission." "No," he agreed. "That is rather the point." And Alette went. Andres in spring is a green country, and the northern stores of Andres are 4 granaries, 9 depots, and 206 miles of the worst road in the civilized world. She was very good at it. She had known she would be, in the way you know a thing you have never been allowed to test. She rebuilt the return schedules in the first month. She found 12,000 measures that had been mislaid, rather than stolen, and made 2 enemies doing it. She argued with Emerich of Andres in open council 9 times in 7 months, won 5, and on one memorable occasion was told by his master of the rolls that no warden in living memory had spoken to a king that way. She had a house with 4 rooms and a window that faced north. She had work she was proud of. She was, by every measure she had ever used to judge a life, doing extremely well, and she was hollow the whole time. The letters started in the 2nd week. They came with the ordinary post, never by courier, never sealed with anything official. Some were long, some were 4 lines. He wrote about the treasury reforms and asked her opinion on the depot rates, and did not always wait for an answer before writing again. He wrote once, at length and with obvious relish, about a council session in which the House of Rahl had been made to itemize 9 years of expenses allowed. He never asked her to come back, not once. She noticed that in the 2nd month, and was angry about it for a fortnight, without being able to say why. One of them said, "I have been reading the depot book at Kell. You were right about the 11 days, and I have written to tell the depot master so, and he has written back to say that in 31 years nobody has ever asked him anything." One of them said, "Rennick's sister has the pension." I went, myself. She threw a cup at me, and then she made me tea, and I think I would rather have another cup. One of them was 4 lines long, and said only that the thaw had come early, that the return carts had gone through on the correct day at the correct rate, and that he had stood at the pass and watched them go, and had not been able to explain to anybody present why he was smiling. And one of them, near the bottom of the page about drainage, said, "I am not asking. I know what asking would do. I only want you to know that the not asking is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I am doing it on purpose, and I will go on doing it." She kept every one. She did not answer a single one, and she kept every one. In a drawer she opened a great deal more often than she opened the accounts. Yara came in the 4th month and stayed. Osric wrote, badly, with the ink smudged. "He is a better king now," Yara said one evening, which was the closest she ever came to an opinion. "He is," Alette agreed. "He is also thin as a rail, and he does not sleep, and last month he rode to the pass and back in 1 day for no reason anybody could name." Yara did not look up from her boots. "The pass road, Alette. Which goes where?" Alette did not answer that. The thread was the worst of it. It had not gone away after the south stair. It had not grown either, not much, because a severed bond only mends if both of them let it. And she had spent 7 months holding hers shut with both hands, but it was there. She would be counting sacks at Velo Depot and feel a distant flicker of something that was not hers, some faraway satisfaction or ache, and she would put it down and go and stand outside in the cold until it passed. In the 8th month, the letters stopped. Not gradually. There was one on a Tuesday about the spring sowing, and then there was nothing, and after 12 days Audette caught herself standing at the window with the post in her hand going through it twice. On the 14th day one came. I said I would not ask, and I have not, and I am not going to start now. But I have come to think that a man who writes every week is still asking, only quietly, and that I have been making you carry the weight of refusing me, without ever giving you anything to refuse. That is one more thing I decided for you, and I have only just seen it, so I am going to stop, not because I have changed my mind, because it is yours now, entirely, and it should always have been. If you never write, I will know what it means, and I will not trouble you again. Be well. Be as happy as you are able. I am glad every day that you are somewhere I cannot reach. She read it 4 times. This is what you wanted, she told herself, and put it in the drawer with the others, and went out and did a full day's work, and came home and took it out again. The rider came 6 days after that, at the 9th bell, on a horse that was finished. Audette was in the yard before Yara had the door open. She knew the livery. She had lived 9 years inside that livery, and she knew, from the way the man came off the horse, exactly what kind of news arrives at that speed. "Warden," he said, "the king is taken." The world went very narrow. 4 days, the rider said. He rode to the North Farms with 2 men, and neither has come back. There is no ransom and no letter. Half the council says the House of Rawl, and half says he has gone off on his own again, and the council is doing nothing while it argues. And Captain Yara's people sent me, because there is nobody left in that palace who will move. Audette heard herself asking about the roads. She heard herself sending for horses, her own voice flat and useful, doing all the things a warden of the northern stores does, and underneath it, very quietly, she was doing something else. She stood in the middle of her own yard with her eyes shut, and she opened her hand. That was all it took. 7 months of holding it closed, and it took nothing at all to stop, and the thread came up out of the dark like a rope going taut. It was thin. It was very far away. It was southeast and not northwest, which meant the North Farms were a lie. It was cold and tired, and underneath the tiredness there was a small, obstinate, familiar thing that she recognized so completely that she made a sound in the empty yard. He was not despairing. He was working the problem. He had been working the problem for 4 days, and he was still working it. She got on the horse. They found him on the 5th day, in a mill on the Rawl estates, with the wheel taken off, and there were 9 men holding it, and Americ of Andres had sent 40, and it was over in less time than it takes to describe. Audette went in through the mill door, with her heart going like a hammer, and stopped. That Kevin of Arundel was sitting on the floor against a grain hopper with his hands bound in front of him, and one eye swollen shut and 4 days of beard, and he was, as far as she could tell, in the middle of an argument with the youngest of his guards about whether the roof beam would take a man's weight. He stopped talking when he saw her. He did not say her name. He looked at her the way he had looked at her, across a plate of gray slate on the worst morning of her life, with his whole face open and the door off its hinges, and Audette crossed the mill floor and knelt down and took his bound hands in both of hers. "I felt you," she said, "from Andres. I felt you the whole way." "I know," said Kevin. He was crying, which she had never seen. "I did not want to hope it. It came up like the sun. I thought I had gone mad in here." She got the cords off. His wrists were a ruin. She held them anyway. Something was knotted round his left hand under the rope, filthy and frayed and gone dark with handling, and she did not have to look at it twice. It was the wedding cord. Both cut ends of it, carried since the slate plate, in the pocket she had watched him put it into on a staircase. "Say it," she said. "What?" You have started it 4 times. Her voice was not working properly. In the hall, and on the ladder, and on the stair, and in the store. Every time somebody has taken it out of your mouth, and I have spent 9 months making up the end of it. Say it now. Cavan of Arundel sat on a mill floor and looked up at her. Alette, he said, there is something you have to know. Yes. I signed it in another room because if I had looked at you I would not have finished. He said it steadily and all the way through, at last, with nothing taking it away. And I have looked at nothing else since. That is the whole of it, that is the sentence. I have been carrying it since the hall, and I could not get it out, and it is not clever, and it is not enough, and I am not asking you for anything, I only wanted you to have it. Alette put her forehead against his. Ask me, she said. He went very still. Not here, she said. Not in a mill with 9 men bleeding in the yard. And not in that hall, and not in front of 200 people who want to watch. She was laughing, and it was coming out wrong, and she did not care. Ask me, in the storehouse. The cold one, with the ladder, where you counted the crates, and got it wrong. 240, said Cavan. 212, said Alette. He asked her in the storehouse 9 days later at midnight, in the cold, with a tally board in his hand, because he had genuinely been counting when she came in and had genuinely forgotten what he was doing. There was no ring. He had not brought one. He explained afterwards, rehearsed a considerable speech, and what came out instead was, do not go back to Andres, or go back to Andres, only marry me either way. Which is how the Queen of Arundel came to spend the first 2 years of her second marriage, 206 miles away, running the northern stores of another king, and coming home over the pass at the thaw with the return carts on the 11th day at the correct rate. They were married in the Hall of Accord, which she chose herself, because she had walked the length of that room once already, and had views about how it should be done the second time. There was a table. There was a document with 2 lines at the bottom, and Cavan came in first, as he had before, and sat down in the same chair. He did not sign it. He sat there with the pen in his hand, and the ink untouched, and his head up, and he watched her come the entire length of that hall, every step of it, and when she reached the table, he was still looking at her. Sign it, said Alette. Not until you are looking, said the Alpha King of Arundel.